You mentioned China, communist China, Daniel. I wanted to swing back to Governor Tim Walz for a second. He's had a long lifetime love affair with the Chinese government and China. He spent a lot of time there. It reminds me a little bit of Bernie Sanders when he talked about the Soviet Union. Bernie's old enough, obviously, to have spent some time in the Soviet Union. He loved the Soviet Union. He was an apologist for the Soviet Union. The difference is Bernie never got that close to the White House. He failed. Tim Walz could become the next vice president. You've written a little bit about this. How troubling and dangerous is his ties? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered. How dangerous is Tim Walz with these ties to China?
No, we've had questions in the past. We've had questions about Bill Clinton's trip to Russia in the past. We've had some serious questions raised about John Kerry's activities, but there's been nobody like Walz. It's absolutely unprecedented because this guy was picked out right out of college. He goes off to teach for a year in China, which is maybe not that big of a deal, but he gushes about being treated like royalty. Again, his words, newspaper coverage from the time. And then he makes a friend in China's Foreign Affairs Department, which is odd because you're teaching, you're just going to China to teach for a bit, then you suddenly have a friend in China's Foreign Affairs Department, or handler, to be polite about it. I'm not sure what the exact Mandarin translation is. This friend or handler finds a whole bunch of Chinese government money so that Walz is able to start a company that takes students on tour to China where they're told about the wonders of the Chinese government. And he goes on to make 30 trips to China. At this point, he's also serving in the National Guard. He's heroically serving in the National Guard until the moment he's actually asked to go somewhere past China to a war zone. And of course, he refuses to do that. But it's a very troubling relationship because he has a relationship as a seemingly private citizen with China, where seemingly he is actually profiting from that relationship with China, and he's pushing Chinese propaganda. He's bringing American students into China. Then he runs for Congress. He runs for Congress, by the way, with an association with the Kerry campaign. He completely lies about getting a start there. It really begins his trail of telling all sorts of lies about his military service, but I digress. In Congress, he's actually on the China committee. Then he runs for governor. You would think that's it. The relationship with China is over. He's going to send a Dear John or a Dear Z letter, but no, instead, China is actually very interested in infiltrating state governments at the local level. They understand the federal level things can be more challenging. There's more scrutiny, but at the state level, there is very, very little scrutiny. That makes things possible, like an event where Governor Walz shows up to speak at a Chinese Communist Front Group organization, one that was actually created by communist sympathizers back in the day who made no bones about it. They were pretty open about them being communists. This was discussed in the Revolution magazine at the time. They're having all these ideological Marxist-Leninist arguments. And then he shows up and he's there. And also there is the head of China's Foreign Influence Department that is actually dedicated to embedding themselves inside state governments. And before this, Walz has been going around and knocking Trump's tariffs and saying, he's just looking out for the farmers of Minnesota. Yes. And maybe you could believe that some politicians would say things like that. Maybe, they're actually just focused on local trade. But this is a guy who's had a decades-long relationship with China. He seemed to have hooked up with a handler there pretty much out of the gate. Seemingly, he was actually profiting from communist China. All this should, raise red flags. There was a time when somebody with this kind of track record would not have gotten a security clearance in a million years. The fact that this kind of thing is not even remarked upon shows how bad things have become.